Okay, so Tricia Heberle is Team Ireland's new chef de mission for the Olympic Games. The role will take her up to the end of the next Olympic Games, which of course is in Tokyo in the year 2020. And I'm delighted to say that Tricia is with us now in studio. Tricia, you're very welcome. How are things?
Things are very busy, but a very exciting time for both myself and for the Olympic Federation of Ireland.
I'm sure they are. When I was reading a bit about you, I see this quote from Peter Scherer, the OFI CEO, who described you as a straight-talking Aussie with a big heart when you were appointed. Is that an accurate summation of who you are?
Oh, I mean, you could say that that's a bit mean. Look, I think many Australians are pretty straight-talking, but I think Australians and the Irish actually have a real affinity. And Australia is full of wonderful Irish people who've really brought something to our country. So I'm hoping that I can do the same here as an Aussie in Ireland. So
just to touch briefly on your background, like you're a former Australian hockey player, people know you from the Olympics in 1984, but also, I guess from your own perspective, your coaching career with hockey was extremely successful. I think 2 gold medal teams you were involved with at the Olympics? Yeah, I mean, I've been very fortunate in my own career that I've been able to transition from having a successful playing career to going into coaching. Hockey was my sport and I absolutely loved it. And across my career, yes, I've been part of 2 gold medal campaigns, a home Olympics in Sydney with the Australian Hockey Roos taking out the gold, and prior to that, 1996 in Atlanta. So you then got into a high-performance role in Australia, I understand, and then in England for a while, and you've been in Ireland for the past couple of years. I have been. I spent some time in the UK, in the UK system, coaching England and Great Britain, returned to Australia and assumed a role of high-performance director for Australian hockey, and then decided that, in fact, I'd spent a lot of time in one sport and felt I had a lot to offer to a whole range of sports. So the last 2 years, I've worked with 7 different Olympic sports, in and around Ireland, which has been a fantastic experience. And most recently spent the last 12 months working with the OFI in just starting to build some of our blocks for planning for Tokyo. Yeah, so talk to us a bit about that, because you've been the high performance lead for the last year and a half or 2 years thereabouts. The initial question I have is, how does that compare to the high performance setups you've worked in the UK and in Australia? I think you have points of difference and you also have similarities. The reality is, if you're trying to support athletes and teams to be successful, there are a whole lot of things that are almost non-negotiables, from daily training environment to quality of coaching to a good balance of technical training camps and competition. From country to country it doesn't change. The thing that probably is a little bit different is the level of resource that's invested, and sometimes just the level of ambition. But Ireland is going through a very exciting period of time in high performance, and there's a lot to like at the moment across a whole range of sports. So talk to us about those 2 things then, resources and ambition. Where are they at currently in Ireland? Where were they at when you first came in? Were they a little bit below where you expected them to be? No, I think sometimes when it's about ambition, people can be a little bit risk averse. I mean, it is a really tough world out there. Sport has a lot of investment into it at the moment, and when you look at some of the bigger countries, it's very hard for Ireland to compete. But what I love about the Irish is they have this wonderful attitude, and whether that is an attitude that comes from at times being the underdog, or whether it's an attitude of just wanting to really prove themselves against the very best in the world. So I actually believe we've had a whole range of results over the last few years that show that the whole high-performance system is emerging. And once you start to back up World Championships, medals in Europe, medals in Olympic Games and medals in World Cup and Championship competition over a period of time, you actually know that you're heading in the right direction. Because sometimes that first breakthrough is the hardest part, because suddenly you're lessening the amount of risk. Because I guess you could make an argument that during challenging financial times, it is a big risk to give a lot of money to high-performance sport when there might be, in the view of some people, things of a higher need. Whereas if somebody's winning medals, it's an easier case to make. Yeah, for sure. And I think what else happens is that if you get some success, and I even think about rowing's success and sailing from the Rio Olympics, it actually gives some of the other sports confidence that they can achieve that as well. I mean, everyone is working very, very hard. Yes, the resources
sport always wants more, but what I find really heartening at the moment is that the government is behind high-performance sport. And we've very recently had a national sport policy that has basically said that they will triple investment into high performance over the next 10 years. And already we know for next year we have a significant increase in high-performance funding that will really help our Olympic sports coming into Tokyo.
How do we stop the divide between high performance and grassroots sport? Because it is the first thing when I saw that national sports policy you were talking about, there was a medals target for, I think, the 2028 Olympics put down in black and white. How did you feel about that? Is it a healthy thing to be giving medal targets like that?
Look, I think first of all that the national sport policy does in fact cover both participation and getting Ireland active, getting more people involved in sport and getting the benefits from sport. But obviously also there is a focus on high performance because that's where you tend to get your profile and that's where your role models come from, which in turn impacts on young kids actually wanting to participate and play their sport. But I think that policy really does provide us with a framework going forward where we recognise that you need both. You can't just focus at the top on a small number of elite sports. You do need to invest at grassroots level. And as I said, our top athletes can be an inspiration for both young people coming into sport and starting in any range of sports, or teenagers that often hit the crossroads as they're finishing school to actually be retained and to continue to play sport. And
the great thing about 2018, when you look at the idea of role models, is the wide spectrum of sports that Ireland has succeeded in and the fact that it's been both men and women who succeeded in those sports.
I think some of the results across the last 6 months have been absolutely fantastic in that respect. I mean, we have a female boxer who's a world champion. Obviously, the women's hockey team, completely unexpected, captured all of Ireland, I think, as far as interest in their journey at the World Cup. And again, if you think about, we have wonderful modern pentathletes. We have our rowers continuing on. We've had horse sport success. I mean, you could just roll off name after name. It is really very exciting. It's both genders, it's team sport, it's individual sport, which, as I say, I believe shows that our high performance system is really starting to mature and the investment that has already been put into high performance is starting to bear fruit.
Why do you think that is?
I think that aligning your system can take time. And also you have different levels of maturity in your national governing bodies. And the bottom line is that you can have a particular talent pool that takes time to be developed and takes time to really achieve at an optimum level. So it's not as easy as just wishing for success or talking about success. Sometimes you have to actually go through some challenges and maybe things actually not always working out before that success comes. But these things don't happen quickly. And as I said before, you've got big systems that have a lot more funding than what we have here in Ireland, that on a global stage, our athletes are competing against them on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, for sure. You are here because you are Ireland's new chef de mission. What is a chef de mission?
That's an interesting one. I don't think I knew a lot about the chef de mission role before I came to Ireland. I've obviously had a lot of Olympic experience, but Olympic experience at the coalface where you really are around the athletes and you're out on the track and you're in competition. I equate the chef de mission almost to the person who is out the front of the orchestra conducting a lot of very, very talented people. So my role is to work with the OFI, work with our major partners, Sport Ireland, the Sport Institute, and our national governing bodies to give our athletes the best possible chance of initially qualifying for the Olympics and then being able to compete to their optimum in the actual games. There's a lot of work behind the scenes. You certainly aren't doing it alone. I have a lot of good people already around me and we will continue to recruit good people to our team. But it really is creating the culture, creating the environment to allow everyone to thrive. So whether we're talking about athletes, whether we're talking about coaches, whether we're talking about some of the sports science, sports medicine support, or whether we're talking about our high performance directors that sit across sport. That's how I see the role.
It's about looking after the collective to have a successful Olympic Games, basically.
It is. It's about all the things that need to happen beforehand. Some of them within our control. Some where we're just responding to IOC or our host organising committee from Japan. But also then making sure that when we actually get to the Games, we're well prepared. We have our contingencies in place, and we're able to actually put our athletes first. to give them the best possible chance of preparing and performing on a world stage.
It's the first time that the Ireland chef de mission has been a fully paid standalone role. Why have we taken that step?
I think these things evolve, and I know the previous model was one of volunteers and probably recruiting from within the board. But I think sport is now so highly professionalised that there is a greater workload, and there is almost an expectation from sport that you have highly qualified people in these sort of lead roles. So I think it's almost something that was potentially always going to happen, and I just feel fortunate that I'm the first person to really be able to take advantage of it moving to full-time.
You say that it's usually somebody volunteering from the board. I think you're actually the first person, not from the board, to be in that role. How does the board feel about that? I'm sure there's plenty of people who applied for the job from the board.
I really have been very pleased with not just the support of the OFI board and our president, Sarah Keane, and Peter Sherrard, the CEO, but also just the support and recognition over the last week or so since the appointment was announced. As someone that has come from outside your system, it takes time to build credibility, it takes time to build understanding and relationships. But to have the endorsement of the board has been very important to me because, of course, there are high calibre people on that board, very experienced in their own right within sport.
When I say to you Ireland at the Rio 2016 Olympics, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Do you see it as a positive or a negative experience for the Irish?
I tend, as someone who's been an athlete and involved in the games at competition level, what I remember is your sailing silver medal and the fantastic performance of your rowers. And I know that people will focus on different things, but I think that should not be lost on us. Going to Olympic Games and achieving medal success is not easy. You don't just get to turn up and say, I want to win a medal. And so what I want to remember is the fact that we have something to build on, and our vision for the OFI is that we will improve on each Games. And so our expectation is that we'll be supporting our athletes to actually go 1, 2, 3 better than what we actually achieved in Rio.
Yeah, but when you look at Rio, and if you take one particular example, we can talk about boxing, we can talk about the Michael O'Reilly situation on the eve of the Games. If you were chef de mission in 2016, would you have handled that any differently to how Ireland did handle the Michael O'Reilly situation, as in letting him stay in the Olympic Village for a number of days after the failed test was made public?
Look, I think it's often easy to look back and provide commentary. My position on this is that we need to ensure that all of our athletes actually understand what our expectations are of them, and not just from an OFI point of view, but from a system point of view and from their own sports point of view. We will be working with the sports around our checks and balances on anti-doping and making sure that the athletes actually understand, and we will be topping up the education all the way, including when we get to the village.
How do you do that?
We do that, as I said, through a combination of Sport Ireland has a very strong position on this, and John Tracy very recently came out endorsing the expectation that the Irish Olympic sport is clean and our athletes are clean. We have education programs in place. As I said, the sports are doing a tremendous job as well. This is something that is non-negotiable. We don't want athletes in situations where they're making mistakes through a lack of education or understanding, but at the same time we need them to take responsibility for everything that they're actually doing in their own training. Yeah,
because in the Rio review there was a couple of lines in it saying with the Michael O'Reilly situation there's not much more we could do. Every athlete was educated and given the relevant information when it came to anti-doping, but clearly something slipped through the cracks. Clearly that education perhaps didn't do enough, or maybe it did, and it is really just an individual case. But just to be devil's advocate for a moment, perhaps the education in Rio 2016 didn't do enough, and this is why we had this situation. How can we do more? What specifically are you doing in terms of educating athletes in terms of around anti-doping?
Yeah, look, again, it's very difficult for me to provide commentary on Rio, and if I look around the world and even experiences within the Australian system, athletes make mistakes. The most important thing is that we actually learn lessons from those mistakes and ensure that we put things in place so they don't happen again. One of the things with the Rio Review is across a whole range of sports, and if we don't just focus on the boxing scenario, there were lessons learned around the things that we need to ensure don't happen again, but there were also lessons learned around very good things that were put into place. In equal measure, we need to note both and bring them forward in our planning. But as I said, the most important thing is that from a Sport Ireland level and the Institute, the national governing bodies themselves and the OFI, we will leave no stone unturned around our anti-doping education and engaging with the athletes. And so initially that will start within the sports, but as we get closer to the games, the OFI will certainly be taking responsibility to be engaging with all of our athletes and our coaches and staff to ensure that they actually understand the expectations of a clean Team Ireland.
In general, how clean do you think the Olympic Games are? Both, obviously, you've seen in the Winter Games, something that we haven't quite seen in any sporting environment ever, really, particularly when it came to 2014 in Sochi. But generally, do you feel that going forward that things are getting better in terms of anti-doping on a worldwide scale?
Look, I would like to think so. I think, unfortunately, we tend to dwell on a small percentage of athletes and countries that can often paint sport in a bad light. The reality is that we have a more significant population of athletes, sports and countries who are clean and are committed to clean and want to compete on a level playing field. And that's what I want to focus on. I think it's easy to be distracted. As I said, it's easy to commentate and have opinions. But as far as I'm concerned, we will do everything possible to support our sports and support our athletes to make sure that we are competing clean, and that is something that we actually feel very proud about.
One other thing I wanted to ask you about is the Sparking Performance Report. You were involved with that, if I'm not mistaken. The
Sparking Performance program is actually a program that is facilitated through the Sport Ireland Institute.
Right.
It caters to a group of high performance directors, predominantly from Olympic sports. And we are working with those performance directors on a 2-year program around their own professional growth, around their ability to work together and learn from each other, certainly with Toyko as a high priority, but also to ensure that they're going back into their sports and the impact they're having on their national coaches, on their support staff and on the athletes is as higher impact as they can possibly have. It's another example of where Sport Ireland are providing significant support, not just to sports and to getting athletes and teams to the Olympic Games, but in supporting leadership and professional development for our leaders.
Yeah, like when I look at it, I think it's a very, very interesting one. I'd like to know what you learned almost from it in, I guess, helping performance directors, because when we speak about boxing, and just to mention Rio again, there was obviously big questions about the high performance unit not having a high performance director for quite some time. Then after Rio, Bernard Dunn comes in. Like, was Bernard one of the people that you were working with? Yeah,
Bernard is actually in the program at the moment, and I very much enjoy working with Bernard. He obviously has a very strong background. He's come in after Rio. So again, probably has had the benefit of that Rio review and with a fair bit of direction as to where boxing needs to go to. But I could name half a dozen outstanding performance directors that we have in the system at the moment. Some have been there for 2 or 3 Olympic cycles. Some are new to those roles and are transitioning from being national coaches. Leadership is absolutely critical at all levels. And as I said, the work we're doing to support our PDs, I think, is going to be significant, not just for Toyko, but for their day-to-day leadership of their programs with their sports and their athletes.
How much does Ireland have the potential to become a hotbed in that area, where if we're putting such a focus on high-performance directors, which I think is a pretty good idea, that there is almost an idea where the next challenge becomes protecting those high-performance directors? I know Billy Walsh left for varying reasons, but that sort of thing where perhaps our high-performance directors are being poached. Are we focused on keeping them all in-house, we train them up and we keep them?
Look, certainly our message to sport, and I think this is something that Sport Ireland and the Institute are very aware of, is that against 2 scenarios where we're able to recruit world-class performance directors and or national coaches, and they are doing well and they are having success, we need to be able to retain them, and we need to identify what it would take to actually retain them. But
we have the resources to do so.
I would hope so, and as I said, increased government investment will help our national federations with that. The other thing is that we also need to identify young leaders that are coming through our own system. So there are times where we will recruit from outside, sometimes where you're recruiting from your own local community. But there are outstanding people coming through administration and coming through coaching roles that have all the skills and the experience to transition into some of those key performance director roles. So I think what sport needs to be doing is ensure that there are succession plans. If we anticipate that we are going to have a retirement, or we anticipate that people potentially could be lost to the system, number one, we've got to retain them. We've got to do everything possible to retain them. If we can't retain them, we've got to have their successor ready to step up, and I think that's just as important.
Final point, Tokyo 2020, I guess, just to bring this all round full circle, what is our target from an Irish perspective in terms of medals?
Look, I think that's the territory of Sport Ireland. Sport Ireland are the primary investor into our Olympic sports, and our targets are, as I say, improving on our performances from Tokyo. So if we're in a position where some of the results we've had across the last 6 to 12 months, we can continue to support those sports and those athletes in a way whereby they qualify for the Olympics first and then they actually come into Tokyo with a high possibility of success. I think rather than setting a number which says we've got to win 10 gold medals or 6 gold medals, which puts in a lot of unnecessary pressure on people, I think we've really just got to focus on how we actually support them coming in, because we know that our athletes can win medals, and it's hard to say, can we back up with the O'Donovan brothers in rowing? As I said, competition is tough, but the indicators are that they've continued to achieve, and you'd probably be prepared to put a bet on them in Tokyo. But we've got a whole range of sports that are a possibility. I'd like to think that our women's hockey is not a one-off, and if we can qualify that team, then they're certainly possible of anything. We've got our boxers, we've got sailors, we've got Thomas Barr, a breakout performance this summer in Europe. It's really exciting for Irish sport at the moment.
And it does seem that the funding seems to be a little bit more hopeful in terms of actually backing up that thing. Like we saw that the high performance sport funding announced this year, the €1.5 million, of course, a third of that went to Hockey Ireland. Just going through some of the figures there, I see that the second biggest kind of benefactor of that money was actually the Olympic Council of Ireland with 175 grand. Then below that you had Paralympics Ireland, Horse Sport Ireland, Swim Ireland, then Gymnastics, Athletics, IABA Cycling. Why was the Olympic Council of Ireland, of course now the Olympic Federation of Ireland, second on that list? Why did it need more money than the individual federations?
Look, I think you'd have to ask Sport Ireland. I'm sure there is a historical context around supporting the OFI. The OFI play a very important role. Since the announcement of that 1.5 million, and as you say, with 500 million of that going to hockey, there's actually been another increase in high performance funding, which I believe will be announced in January. So pretty much all of our Olympic sports are going to benefit from that and be in a lot better position than what they have been in the first 2 years of the cycle.
Well, let's hope so. I think we can all agree to that one. Tricia Heberle, thank you so much for coming in and joining us in studio.
Thank you very much.